The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
You never quite know when a person experiences a brush with Kedusha, how they're changed forever. Do you really ever know? There's a Yid who lives in Muncie. Many of you may have heard his name. He and his family are one of the most extraordinary people in the world. His name is Rabbi Ephraim Weiss. Rabbi Ephraim Weiss and his wife, Mrs. Ruchi Weiss, they should live and be well. Rabbi Ephraim is a Yid who has been suffering from ALS for a number of years. But it hasn't stopped him from learning. He's on his third cycle of learning Shas B'iyun. I was privileged to be at his second Siyum HaShas. The stories I could tell you about he and his family are beyond belief. But to conclude, let me focus on just one. For the last number of winters, the Weiss Mishpacha, Rebbe Ephraim David, his wife, Mrs. Ruchi Weiss, and family, they come to North Miami Beach for part of the winter. And a large part of the day, Rebbe Ephraim David is brought to the canal, a body of water, where Chavrusa learns and reads with him for hours. This past winter, he was to have an eye procedure done, so the day before, through his eye movement on a computer, he motioned to his wife and children, I want to learn Ritzufos, 8 or 10 hours straight without interruption, as a schus for the next day procedure. He's on the canal learning with one of his children, and his wife, Mrs. Ruchi Weiss, decides she was going to go out to buy some food items. She's going out shopping. So she crossed the street from the home to the canal to tell one of the attendants, I'll be out for a bit. As she's walking down the canal towards where her husband is, there's a young Mexican who's sitting on the edge of the canal playing soulful music. It happens to be pleasant. So Mrs. Ruchi Weiss stops the young Mexican who's playing on the canal and says, it's very beautiful music you play. In fact, I wouldn't mind if maybe my family, who's a bit down, got to enjoy some of your music. By any chance, do you know any Hebrew songs? He looked at her and said, I actually know 4 songs. And then he said, and I quote, he named, I know how to play Tzama Nafshi, Ani Mamin, and I happen to be forgetting now the other 2, but he said the other 2. And she said to the Mexican, how do you know those songs? He said, believe it or not, I'm actually Jewish. Wow. Yep, I'm Jewish. I happen to be now here. And he was on his way to some foreign country, unfortunately, very, very super uber lost. And I mean in the spiritual sense. Mrs. Weiss asked him, just tell me something, another Yid, tell me something. He actually said, and it's very painful, for reasons that will be obvious, I will not mention his name, but he did say that his experiences, if you will, were so difficult and so discouraging for him that he's worked all of his life, these young years, to forget every single part about Judaism that he could. I think he even said he went to therapy to mamish forget everything advad b'chlal. It's a heartbreak. No one should ever, ever, ever know. At that point, Mrs. Weiss said, is there anything that you remember? He thinks, there's one thing I remember, and I can't forget, because it was essentially his brush with Kedusha. I'm not going to give you his name, but this young Jew said, there's one thing I remember. Did you ever hear of Muncie? He asked Mrs. Weiss. She says, yes. He says, years ago, there was a young man, a Hasidic Jew, who was diagnosed with ALS. And I and a few others were asked during the year to help him out. And I had a shift during the year. And he and his wife were the nicest, kindest people in the world. I'll never, ever forget. But I feel badly because I'm sure right after that year the young man died. He had ALS. And I always wondered about his young wife. Who did she remarry? At which point Mrs. Ruchi Weiss said, calling him by name, "That's my husband, Rabbi Ephraim David, that you took care of. And Baruch Hashem, as you could see, we're still married. And I'm the one that you remember." At that point, Mrs. Weiss took out her phone and called a daughter in Muncie, because she remembered about 20 years earlier at a Purim Suda, this Yid was hugging Rebbe Ephraim David. And the daughter quickly went through the photo album, found the picture from about 18 years earlier, had it sent to her phone, and showed it to the fellow of what he and Rebbe Ephraim David were like on that Purim years ago. He then went over to Rebbe Ephraim David, and Imamish fell on him and he was crying. You never know what will happen when you experience a brush with Kedusha. That, he tells Mrs. Ruchi Weiss, I'll never forget. The kindness and the niceness and the Chizak Dies Yisrael, such brushes with Kedusha, you'll never, ever forget.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org